Ferdinand Marcos Sr. or Ferdinand Emmanuel Edralin Marcos was born on September 11, 1917 in the town of Sarat, Ilocos Norte. His father is Mariano Marcos and her mother is Josefa Edralin. Mariano Marcos was a lawyer and congressman from Ilocos Norte, Philippines. He was executed by Filipino guerrillas in 1945 for being Japanese propagandist and collaborator during World War II. Drawn and quartered with the use of carabaos, his remains were left hanging on tree. Josefa Marcos was schoolteacher who would far outlive her husband, dying in 1988. 2 years after the Marcos family left her in Malacanang Palace when they fell into exile after the 1986 People Power Revolution. Ferdinand was first baptized in the Philippines Independent Church but was later baptized in the Catholic Church at the age of 3. Marcos lived with his first common law wife, Carmen Ortega, an Ilocana mestiza, who was 1949 Miss Press Photography. They had 3 children and resided for about 2 years at 204 Ortega Street in San Juan. In August 1953, their engagement was announced in Manila dailies. Not much is known about what happened to Ortega and their children after, but Marcos married Imelda Trinidad Romualdez on April 17, 1954, only 11 days after the first met. They had 3 biological children, Bongbong Marcos, Amy Marcos, and Irene Marcos. Marcos' 4th child with Ortega was born after his marriage to Imelda. Marcos had an affair with American actress Dovie Beams from 1968 to 1970. According to reports by the Sydney Morning Herald, Marcos also had an affair with former Playboy model Evelyn Hegiesi around 1970 and sired a child with her, Annalisa Josefa, named after his mother Josefa. Marcos and Imelda later adopted Amy Marcos. Marcos claimed that he was a descendant of Antonio Luna, a Filipino general during the Philippine-American War. He also claimed that his ancestor was 16th century pirate Lim Ah Hong, who used to raid the coast of the South China Sea. He is a Chinese mestizo descendant, just like many other presidents. Education of Ferdinand Marcos. Marcos studied law at the University of Philippines in Manila, attending the College of Law. He excelled in both curricular and extracurricular activities, becoming a member of the university's swimming, boxing, and wrestling teams. He was also an accomplished orator, debater, and writer for the student newspaper. While attending the UP College of Law, he became a member of the Upsilon Sigma Pi, where he met his future colleague in government and some of his staunchest critics. When he sat for the 1939 bar examination, he was a bar top-notcher. With a score of 92.35%, he graduated cum laude. He was elected to the Pi Gamma Mu and Pi Kappa Pi International Honor Societies and later giving him its most distinguished member award 37 years later. Marcos as soldier during 1940s. Marcos' military service during World War II had been subject of debate and controversy both in the Philippines and international military service. Marcos, who had received ROTC training, was activated for service in the U.S. Armed Forces in the Philippines. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, he served as a 3rd lieutenant during the mobilization in the summer and fall of 1941, continuing until April 1942, after which he was taken prisoner. According to Marcos' account, he was released from prison by the Japanese on August 4, 1942. and U.S. military records show that he rejoined USAFIP forces in December 1944. Marcos' military service then formally ended with his discharge as a major in the 14th Infantry U.S. Armed Forces in the Philippines, Northern Luzon in May 1945. Controversies regarding Marcos' military service revolved around the reason for his release from the Japanese Po camp, his action between release from prison in August 1942 and return to the USAFIP in December 1944, his supposed rank upon discharge from USAFIP, and his claims to be being the recipient of numerous military decorations, most of which were proven to be fraudulent. Marcos' declaration of martial law became known to the public on September 23, 1972, when his press secretary Francisco Tadtad announced through the radio that proclamation number 1081, which Marcos had supposedly signed 2 days earlier on September 21, had come into force and would extend Marcos' rule beyond the constitutional two-term limit. Ruling by decree, he almost dissolved press freedom and other civil liberties to add propaganda machine, closed down Congress and media establishments, and ordered the arrest of opposition leaders and militant activists, including Senators Benigno Aquino Jr., Jovito Salonga, and Jose W. Jokno. Marcos claimed that martial law was the prelude to creating his bagong lipunan, a new society based on new social and political values. The early years of martial law gained public approval as it was believed to have caused crime rates to drop. Ferdinand Emmanuel Adralin Marcos Sr. was a Filipino politician, lawyer, dictator, and kleptocrat who was the 10th President of the Philippines from 1965 to 1986. He ruled under martial law from 1972 until 1981 and kept most of his martial law powers until he was deposed in 1986, branding his rule as constitutional authoritarianism under his kilusang Bagong Lipunan, New Society movement. One of the most controversial leaders of the 20th century, Marcos' rule was infamous for its corruption, extravagance, and brutality. Marcos gained political success by claiming to have been the most decorated war hero in the Philippines, but many of his claims have been found to be false, with United States Army documents describing his wartime claim as fraudulent and absurd. After World War II, he became a lawyer, then served in the Philippines House of Representatives from 1949 to 1959, and the Philippines Senate from 1959 to 1965. He was elected the President of the Philippines in 1965 and presided over an economy that grew during the beginning of his 20-year rule, but would end in the loss of livelihood, extreme poverty, and a crushing debt crisis. He pursued an aggressive program of infrastructure development funded by foreign debt, making him popular during his first term, although it would also trigger an inflationary crisis which would lead to social unrest in his second term. Marcos placed the Philippines under martial law on September 23, 1972. Shortly before the end of his second term, martial law was ratified in 1973 through a fraudulent referendum. The Constitution was revised. Media outlets were silenced, and violence and oppression were used against the political opposition, Muslim suspected communists, and ordinary citizens. After being elected for a third term in the 1981 Philippine presidential election, Marcos popularity suffered greatly due to economic collapse that began in early 1983 and the public outrage over the assassination of opposition leader Senator Benigno Ninoy Aquino Jr. later that year. This disconnect, the resulting resurgence of opposition in 1984 Philippine parliamentary election, and the discovery of documents exposing his financial accounts and false war records led Marcos to call the snap election of 1986. Allegation of mass cheating, political turmoil, and human rights abuses led to the People Power Revolution of February 1986, which removed him from power. To avoid what could have been a military confrontation in Manila between pro and anti-Marcos troops, Marcos was advised by U.S. President Ronald Reagan through Senator Paul Laxalt to cut and cut cleanly. Marcos then fled with his family to Hawaii. He was succeeded as president by Aquino's widow, Corazon Cory Aquino. According to source, document provided by the Presidential Commission on Good Government, the Marcos family stole 10 billion from the Central Bank of the Philippines. The PCGG also maintained that the Marcos family enjoyed a decadent lifestyle, taking away billions of dollars from the Philippines between 1965 and 1986. His wife Imelda Marcos, made infamous in her own right by the excesses that characterize her and her husband's conjugal dictatorship, is the source of term Imeldific. Two of their children, Ime Marcos and Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr., are still active in Philippines politics, with Bongbong having been elected president in 2022 election. Ferdinand and Imelda Marcos held the Guinness World Record for the largest ever theft from government for decades, although Guinness took the record down from their website while it underwent periodic review a weeks before the 2022 Philippines presidential election.